What's going on, everybody? Welcome to this week's Lumix Live. We have a lot of fun stuff to talk about today. We're going to be, primarily as the title says, we're going to be talking about the GH6 and going through some of the menu options and actually kind of demystifying some of them. There's a lot of questions that came up as we came out of NAB, where we got a lot of questions about, hey, what does this feature do? Where can I find it in the menu? So I wanted to take this week, go through the menus. I got my GH6 hooked up here, like you can see. So we can actually go through this stuff and kind of, get you guys some good information. Some of the housekeeping, if you are new to the Lumix Live platform and this live stream, these are interactive conversations that we have with everybody. So if you have a question for me and you want to get it asked during the broadcast, make sure to tag at Lumix Cameras in front of your question, or anywhere, honestly, anywhere within it. This way I can see it on my side and then we can address them. Typically, we're going to go through some of the kind of prepared things that I have, and then we'll jump in and do some questions, go back to doing some prepared stuff. This way we give an opportunity for everyone to kind of get your question asked, and hopefully I can provide you an answer with it. Excuse me. Even though we're focusing very heavily on the GH6 today, the Q&A, the questions that you have, doesn't really have to be necessarily focused right on the GH6. We're just using it primarily as an example since it has the most broad feature set of the existing Lumix cameras in the system to date. So yeah, aside from that, let's see here. I want to remind everybody about as I just realized I never set up my audio on that channel, so give me 1 second. That's better. Tons of fun stuff resetting up OBS so that the streams are solid again. So let's start that again. I would like to remind everybody about Lumix Pro Services. We have the red and the platinum tier available here in the United States. These two tiers give you that extra level of peace of mind if you're someone who really likes to make sure that your equipment is supported, ready to go for when you're out in the field and something potentially could happen to your equipment. The red tier is free here in the United States. You can check it out at the QR code that's up on the screen right now. This is qualified for pretty much anyone that's purchased a Lumix camera or a new Lumix camera over the last couple of years. So make sure to get yourself registered on that. If you've got a new camera, it's free. Just get yourself registered. It's awesome. Then we have the platinum tier, which is our step up. The platinum tier is a paid level service. This gets you all of the normal, kind of warranty extensions that we have with our products. You get 3-year manufacturer warranty when you do register. But the platinum tier also gets you a lot of things like 2-day repairs with free next day shipping both ways. You get 20% off out of warranty repairs. So if you drop a lens, break a camera, anything like that, you're going to be covered for a discount on that repair should you need it. You also have access to our membership hotline, so if you need to speak to someone on the phone, or if that's something that you prefer to do instead of chat, you do have access to that platform as well. You also get annual sensor cleanings, lens calibrations, firmware updates, all that kind of fun stuff. So if you like having your equipment ready to go for the next, the next season of shooting, you're going to be all solid, ready to go for your cameras there. We also have probably what I think is one of the cooler, nice additions that you get with the Platinum Series. You get a Peak Design customized strap with it. So if you're someone who uses the Peak Design strap lug system, you get a strap that comes along right there. It's a really nice customized design strap. I unfortunately just didn't take mine out of the bag. Still unpacking everything from NAB. So let's see here. What else? Want to remind everybody about the firmware updates. There consistently are firmware updates provided for the existing Lumix cameras. So if you haven't already, make sure to go take a look at the link that I dropped in the chat here. You can make sure your camera's up to date, make sure your lenses are up to date, lens firmware, camera firmware. You don't have to do them sequentially. If you've missed one, you can just load in the most recent one. That'll include all of the previous updates. So make sure to go take a look at that, get your cameras updated. There's always some cool stuff added to them, which we have planned for the GH6. So we do have actually a pretty big feature update coming to the GH6, but also some minor things that get updated to correct issues that some of you all may find, so that you can get a better performing product over time. So let's take a look at some of these questions first before we jump into the GH6 menus here. So one of the first questions that came in, Tobias, is there a possibility you can make zebras visible while adjusting exposure via exposure compensation? Once you hit that button, zebras don't show. Could it be fixed via firmware? I want to say it probably can be fixed with firmware, but I know that not all the cameras in our lineup operate the exact same way when it comes to things like zebras or waveform, stuff like that, showing up while you're changing things like ISO or exposure. But that is something that we will definitely have to take a look at. Exposure compensation is one area that I'm fairly confident that, you know, you're correct. Obviously, I don't typically work around too much like that. When it comes to checking my zebras, usually I just set my exposure at 0 and I use the offset instead of using exposure compensation. But I will check into it and see if it's something that our engineers are aware of, if it's something that can be fixed with firmware, or what the deal is, and we will get back to you on that. Genie Lamp Studios, what's the best luminance level settings for video mode on the GH6 for interview recording and all-around recording? Thank you. Well, this is going to be probably a bit different depending on who you talk to. So for my style of shooting, when I'm doing things like this, I'm sending content to YouTube, we're doing broadcasts, I'm not necessarily really working with heavy color grading or anything like that. I set my luminance values to, 16 to 235 if I'm working in 8-bit, or it'll be 64 to 940 if I'm in 10-bit and I'm working in the like 709 color profile. Primarily, this is just because when I'm working in things like OBS and sending to YouTube, it's a 709 color space. It's just going to be a lot easier, and I don't really need all the extra information. So that's usually what I shoot in. The flip side of that is that if you're going to be editing and you're going to be working on this footage, in the camera, you could select, or probably should be selecting, the full range, so 0 to 1023 or 0 to 255, depending on the bit depth that you're working in, and then conforming all of that in your software. The logic there being that you want to work with the largest palette that you have available, so that when you do bring it in, you're not worried about, you know, hey, I've clipped out my highlights because I'm artificially crutching, you know, how bright I can let a piece of data go. So that tends to be probably the better way to shoot. If you're doing editing and you're just kind of generally shooting around, leave it at full range, do 0 to 255 or 0 to 1023. It's not really going to hurt anything. At that point, you just have to be a little more aware of where you're outputting the footage and how you're handling it in software, and then you add in the other complexity of if you're using an external monitor and you have it triggered, then how does the monitor handle whether or not you're using, you know, which luminance range for you. So it gets a little more in-depth there, but yeah, in general, just keep it full range, 0 to the top number. Let's see here. Next one, weird yet important question about the silver strap holes on Lumix bodies. How strong are they really? The one on my GH5 started wiggling, so I'm worried about it might come out. They're definitely not going to come out. The strap lugs are attached internally inside the camera. If one does come loose, this is one of those, you know, kind of good reasons to get things like Lumix Pro Services, where you can send it in and have the camera checked. You know, to make sure everything's working properly, stuff like that. If a strap lug feels like it's coming loose or anything like that, then you'd want to send it in. I'm a bit over paranoid with certain things like that, from pretty much the entire time I've been working in this industry. So usually if I ever have an issue with something that even remotely doesn't feel right, I get it into service and I have them take care of it. Having your kit in the, kind of best condition you possibly can is going to be always one of the best ways to make sure that when you're on a location, something bad doesn't happen. But overall, as far as the strap lugs go, you shouldn't really ever worry about them coming out of the camera. In the 7 years I've been working here at Panasonic, I've never seen an instance of a strap lug coming out. In the pushing close to 15 years that I've been in this industry, not just on this side, but in the retail side, I've never had a camera have to come in for service from any brand. So really shouldn't be too big of an issue to worry about. Let's see here. Peter says, best part of every Thursday afternoon. Well, thank you. Glad this is something that y'all enjoy. Let's see here. Tim has a list of things locked to a custom mode changed with the GH6. Some things I would expect to reset to the custom assignment seem not to do that anymore. That's something that I have to check in on. I see Tara, you're here too. That's one of the things that I still haven't had the opportunity to really actually dig into. Between going out for NAB and having to get that show set up and programming for this next month, which just a heads up, we have the entire month's worth of Lumix live streams are ready to go online right now. So if you go over and take a look at the playlist, you're able to set reminders and all of that fun stuff. So if you haven't done that already, definitely do that at the end of the stream or leave this one open while you're doing that. But it is something that I am looking into to see if I can get some more clarity as to what is actually carried over in the custom function settings. There was a firmware update that came out for some of the other cameras that corrected some of the saved camera settings. So yeah, I will have to follow up on that. So let's see here. Where's the live composite view function on the GH6? If there would it be made with GH Mark II? So the GH6 does not have live view composite. I'm honestly not sure if it's getting live view composite. I would love to have it to have live view composite. It's one of probably the coolest photography based features that's available in our cameras. So you have my support. I'm going to keep pushing for that feature to get added to the camera. I just don't know when or if it's something that's planned to come to the camera. So let's see here. Sky, update, question, an update for the question you asked a couple weeks ago. Any update on why waveform doesn't match the camera on cam to Final Cut Pro? My best guess from the conversations I've had is that it may be a bug in Final Cut, not in the camera, when it's reading the information coming from the camera. With the new sensor and the new processor, there have been, obviously, as we saw with the raw stills photo updating, it took a little bit longer than normal for raw support software to start adding the proper profiles and everything for how this camera's functioning. So it's possible that it's there, but I haven't let it go. We're still checking around, seeing what the situation is, why you're seeing a little bit of a difference there. But the differences between the GH5 and a GH6 are pretty fundamentally different between the way that the images work. So it may just be the way that the software is interpreting, expecting one thing, but the camera's delivering it something different. So we will continue to follow up and see what we can get. Let's see here. Can we set the GH6, is from JC, can we set the GH6 to auto shutter angle like the BGH1 so we don't have to set shutter speed after we change to different frame rates? Yeah, so the GH6 and actually pretty much every major new camera we've come out with supports shutter angle and ISO. So when you set it shutter angle, you're not going to have to worry about changing any of that. It's going to do it properly based on that. You do have to go into the menu, which I am going to show everybody in a minute or two, to where you actually change shutter angle and set your camera up that way. So hopefully that addresses your question. JC also has another follow-up. For long video recordings, 3 to 5 hours, what do you recommend? The dummy battery you make to connect to your AC adapter, or USB-C to an outlet with a battery inside the GH6? Personally, for long form recording, I much prefer doing the USB-C route. So powering, like I actually have my GH6 right now powered with a one of the Anchor batteries that we were using at NAB. For one main, very important reason, when you're using a DC adapter, so using anything where you're going to be plugging in, replacing the battery, and running it off either wall voltage or something like a D-tap, as long as you have the correct voltage coming from the D-tap, that's a whole nother story. You always have a built-in fail-safe when you're doing it over USB. The internal battery, as long as you're using the proper 9-volt, 3-amp compatible USB-C adapter, is going to charge and power the camera while you're using it, which means that your battery will always be topped off at 100%. If you're not using a 9-volt, 3-amp, it's not going to charge the battery. It will run off the combined output from the two, but certain operations can end up making the actual battery diminish faster than you'd expect, than it can actually maintain charge. So you want to be a little cautious with that. But ultimately, when you do it that way, it means that the camera will always have a fail-safe in case you lose power from the external device. When you're using a D-tap or a battery delete, you have to be much more careful with ensuring that your power supply is uninterrupted. So in a high-paced environment, use USB-C. It's just going to be a much safer way to go. If you're in a studio where no one's going to be going around the power and you're not really going to have to ever worry about that, then yeah, using the DC coupler is going to be perfectly fine. There's not really an issue there. It just depends on the scenario that you're in. So, Jake says, well, streams are amazing. Thanks. Well, thank you for joining in. Thank you for the kind words. Andy, and this is the last question we'll get to before we jump into the menus. Any news on the 4K live crop or maybe 6K live crop on the GH6? I use it in my other Lumix cameras. It's pretty useful and looking forward to having it on my GH6. So I don't have any information as far as 4K live crop or possibly a 6K live crop. 6K live crop wouldn't be able to be done because if you think about it, the live cropping mode can only be lower, like a lower resolution than what the native sensor resolution is, because you have to crop into it, and that's the whole purpose of it. So as far as if the GH6 is going to get it, I don't know. And besides, even if I did know, I wouldn't be able to tell you. You know, I can't release firmware information unless we publicly release it. So other than the stuff that's coming already that we've announced, anything outside of that is kind of just all speculation at this point. So, all right, let's actually jump in and take a look at the menus on the GH6, right? So, you know, when we talked about there's a lot of things that the GH6 has added feature-wise that now has added a lot of new functionality. It's also changed around some of the ways that the menu descriptions are and where certain things are actually going to be found in the camera menu. So kind of want to just take you know, we're just going to go right through the menus here and kind of pick off some of the more important things. If something comes up on the screen and you have a question about a certain feature, definitely drop it in the chat and we can go back and go through them. So starting right off the top, you know, not really a whole lot has changed here other than the addition of the dynamic range boost mode. So one of the things that we have built into the camera, for the most part, I like it, and it's usually more than enough information, is that if you press the display button on the back of the camera, it'll give you a little kind of synopsis of what that mode is supposed to do. So in this case, we're on dynamic range boost mode, and we'll see that it increases the sensor's dynamic range by using the DR boost functionality that we have built into this camera. So that's kind of the main one. This is the option that will get you to that 13 plus stops of dynamic range if you're trying to shoot in basically anything at 60 frames per second or below. When you have this mode enabled, and I'll show this in a moment when we get to the actual recording modes, the menus will the menus will be darkened out or grayed out for the frame rate options that are not available when using DR Boost. So the camera's going to tell you when you can and cannot use it. But for those that don't want to go through and kind of figure it out, one by one, it's anything under 60 frames per second. At 60 frames per second and below, DR Boost can be used to boost your highlight dynamic range. So when you start working with this, you'll notice that your native or your base ISO changes up to 2000, but that distribution of dynamic range is different compared to not using it. You're going to get about a stop to a stop and a half, depending on who you talk to, in your highlight range, and you're going to get much more detail out of your shadows, with the trade-off of a slightly noisier image than you would have without using DR Boost. But the actual usable dynamic range is higher. It's a little hard to explain for those that have never used a system that uses something like this before. It does get you higher dynamic range, even though you're getting a slightly noisier image than not using DR Boost. Let's see here. Below that, one of the other things that we got a lot of questions about was Synchro Scan. How to use it, where to find it. As you can see here, Synchro Scan, it's as simple as just turning it on and off. And then this lets you go in and change your shutter speeds in single degrees for the most part. A couple angles don't carry over, and some of that's going to depend on the actual frame rates that you're recording at. So this allows me to come in and fine tune my exposure values with shutter angle or even shutter speed. When you're in shutter speed, it'll also allow you to do it. So yeah, this lets you get some pretty fine-tuned control to offset poor lighting or low quality lighting where you're going to get some banding. All right, OBS reconnected. OBS is having all kinds of problems. For those that haven't updated to Windows 11 yet, don't. When you do, it just seems to cause all kinds of problems. So we should be back now. OBS is... Okay, yes, we're back. All right, so Synchro Scan, really useful tool. If you don't want to be working on the normal, say 180 degree, 216, the normal ranges that you would expect for offsetting lighting, it can make a lot of sense to just use Synchro Scan. This also works really well if you're going to be filming, say, like televisions or a display in the frame, and you want to be able to offset the cycle rate of that, and it may be different than the cycle rate of the lights. So yeah, the GH6 has that fully blown in there. Huge opportunity for making your life a lot easier for post. The next one we get is Master Pedestal level. Unless you know what you're doing with Master Pedestal level, the biggest thing I can advise is to not touch it. Don't play around with it. There were early videos that talked about with the GH5, and actually I think even the GH4 maybe, that talked about how you can magically get extra dynamic range by playing around with Master Pedestal level. Don't do that. It adjusts the black levels so that you can match them to other cameras as well. So yeah, for the most part, leave Master Pedestal alone unless you are in a very specific circumstance where you need to match the black levels to another camera. For that question, it came up about the shutter angle and gain operation. That was from JC. So on the image quality page 2, this is where you'll see the ability to change the camera into your angle and ISO, seconds or ISO, or seconds and decibels if you're coming more from the kind of video side of the industry. When you have the camera set up into shutter or angle and ISO, no matter what you change your frame rate to or resolution to, you don't have to worry about being on angle or being at the right shutter speed. This will keep the camera so that when you're changing things up, it just functions the way it should. You're going to have the proper motion cadence, and I put quotes around that because a lot of some people don't necessarily follow the shutter angle quote-unquote rules because there are times when you don't actually really want to. So, but shutter speed and gain operation, switching it into angle ISO will let the camera function like you're describing for the BGH1 or a BS1H. You change your frame rates, you know that your motion cadence is going to be proper, makes it super simple, nice and easy. Vignetting compensation and diffraction compensation, these are baked in adjustments to image quality. So vignetting compensation software-wise corrects for vignetting of lenses. All lenses vignette to some extent, and more modern lenses across all manufacturers are doing a lot more software correction for them to give you the best looking image now that we can get out of them. So vignetting compensation, there's two trains of thought on this. From a photography perspective, I always leave it on. From a video perspective, I leave it off. Same with diffraction compensation. This goes to more of the logic that when I'm working with a video file, I want to have the most unaltered piece of footage that I can get, highest quality. So by leaving these things off, it means, yes, I'm going to do more work in post to correct these kinds of things, similar thing to noise reduction, stuff like that. It gives you more flexibility in post to actually provide better corrections than necessarily a camera can produce internally, because you're working with much more advanced software algorithms than you would in a camera. So much more processing performance and power and capabilities, and software tools have gotten pretty impressive with what they can do for things like noise reduction and correcting things like vignetting and stuff like that. Diffraction compensation, it's a little different. Diffraction compensation, that's basically when diffraction is detected, and we know when diffraction kicks in on lenses and cameras, the combinations of sensor size, resolution, things like that. This applies an intelligent sharpening algorithm that offsets the diffraction potential negatives from diffraction. So it's nice to use, but you don't really have to use it. A lot of times with the lenses that you're using, especially if you're using adapted lenses, this isn't going to matter anyway. So yeah, you kind of use that depending on the scenario. And I see, as Dennis points out too, when we go back to vignetting compensation, depending on the type of recording that you're doing things like vignetting compensation in camera could cause some negative impacts when you're working with that footage in post. So as Dennis says, with things like B-RAW or with ProRes RAW, you can get some things like banding caused by using these extra features that are designed really more for in-camera processing, where you're going to be shooting to deliver direct and you're really not going to be doing a ton of post work on a camera. It's a little bit of a change when we think mirrorless interchangeable lens cameras as being, very relatively simplistic tools to use that give you ridiculously high quality that you used to have to go to cinema cameras exclusively for. But the trade-off being that if you want the highest possible quality, you do have to put a little more legwork in. Auto features are cool, but when you want the cleanest, best looking piece of footage, or the, best looking piece of footage that you can actually be working with in post, a lot of times you'll talk to a lot of people and they'll turn a lot of these features off just because it doesn't make sense to bake in and anything that isn't necessary to bake into with the footage. So the rec file format, that's kind of the next big one that we get questions about. So with the GH6 in particular, this is the first camera that we've added things like ProRes natively recording to internally. So we have that ProRes option. We also have the MOV and an MP4 option. So if you're looking for the 8-bit codecs, you have to set the camera to MP4. That's where all of your 8-bit codecs are, and they're lower bit rate, really designed for just kind of turn and burn type shooting. Shoot it, deliver it, you're good to go. Doesn't really need to be the highest, bit rate. You're not really going to be pushing these in post that much. MOV historically is always what gives you the highest quality for the footage. So that's where you're going to see the largest number of 10-bit options, things like 4K 120, Full HD 240. And then your ProRes options, where currently to date, right now, this is where your 5.7K options are. We will be adding Full HD and DCI options as well in ProRes. That is coming in that first firmware update that we will be releasing, or the first major firmware update for the GH6. So stay tuned. We'll have a lot more information as we get closer to the release of those. But the one that's absent that we get a lot of questions about is, well, what about AVC HD? And the truth is, barely anybody really uses AVC HD anymore. I know that may trigger some users in the chat, and I don't mean it to be a negative thing. AVC HD is just one of those recording formats that just isn't as necessary anymore. between the ability that a lot of people would use AVC HD because you had interlaced options, we have them in the regular camera mode now anyway. So I can go into my recording mode, which is the next menu, and we'll actually do that. So we're going to go into rec quality. So I can be looking at rec quality. I can push the display button to open my filtering options, and you'll see under frame rates now, you'll see that we now have a 50 or a 60 frame interlaced option that you can select in MOV. So when we go into this and then I click display, you'll see that we get a 1080p 60 frames per second interlaced option at 2 different bit rates. So if you were in a situation where you need an interlaced piece of footage to come out, we do have the ability to do it. And when you set it in interlaced in this camera, and then you plug an HDMI cable into it, it'll send out an interlaced signal. You can also go in and tell it to change what the output is for the resolution and frame rates. But this is how you'd get in if you're looking for interlaced. But other than that, the other questions that typically come up is, I don't want to necessarily be going through 10 pages worth of frame rate options on this camera. GH6 has 58 options. Yeah, 58 different recording options just in the MOV recording format. That's a lot of frame rates and combinations of bit rates to go through. And a lot of times, your particular shooting style may only be looking for maybe 2 or 3 of these, right? So what we've built into this camera as a carry down from the S1H is the ability to press the display button and go into filtering options. So this lets me come in and say, all right, I know I want 120 frames per second, right? So I've got full HD, 120p, says that I'm going to have 5 options for this. When I click display, right now, this is what I was talking about before. I have DR boost turned on. So if I go to select this, it says can't use this, DR boost is turned on. So I would just, in this case, I'm just going to go back. I'm going to turn my DR boost functionality off for the rest of this demonstration. And then I'm going to go back down into here. And we'll see when I go through frame rates, we'll go to 120p, display. Now I've got my Cinema 4K, 4K, Full HD, all those different options and the different bit depths and the different, whether it's an intra or it's an IPB codec. So this lets me go in and pick them. But the thing that's important about this is that I can go in and say, I know that I always want to be shooting, let's say, Cinema 4K, 120 frames per second at 420 10-bit. That's going to be one of my core, needed frame rates. Well, I can tap the quick menu button and add it to my own list and say, yes, I want to add this to my list. But then I go into filtering and say, but I also want to be able to shoot at my 5.8K open gate recording. So I can come in here, say 5.8K 4x3, click the display button, not half press the shutter, so we're gonna have to redo that. Let's go to resolution, 5.8K, display, and then I can come in here and say, I wanna have my 5.8K 24 frames per second. I also am gonna be using that often. So then I'll just click quick menu, save this on my list, good to go. The part that makes the filtering option probably the most flexible in the camera is that I can also go into this and say I always want to have quick access to one of my ProRes options. I can come in here and say I want ProRes 422HQ. It's the 1.5 gigabit option right now, and I also always want to have access to that as well. So I can go in, click add to list. Yes, it's on my list. So from here, when I go back, you'll see now that rec quality, my list is lit up. It's available as an option now. It's not grayed out like variable frame rate is here or image area video in this particular case. So now when I go in here, I can click this button and say, those are the 3 options that I had just programmed in here. So I don't have to dig in through a bunch of different options, go back and find ProRes, go to that menu first to change it to ProRes, then go into the menu for the rec quality to select it. I can just easily flip through these and say, all right, I want to be shooting in ProRes now. So I click that, it's going to update because I just changed into ProRes. But if I come in here and say, all right, nope, I want to go back to 5.8K, just click on it, cycles the camera, now we're back in 5.8K. This makes it super, super simple to get the core frame rates and resolutions that you're particularly needing to shoot in one area. So you're not going through 10 particular pages of frame rates. And it tends to be one of those little things that, as far as our menus go, gets a little overlooked when a lot of people start going through and kind of quickly reviewing a camera. But the flexibility here is pretty awesome when it comes to actually customizing your camera. Let's take a look at some of the questions that have come in here, because I see a whole bunch of them have come through. So let's see here. Synchro Scan is great for mixed lighting. Yes, it is. It's been awesome when we've been at things like trade shows, where you have hugely different aged lights all up in these convention centers. Let's see here. Marcus says, why is there no 30i? That I'm actually not sure of. I will have to ask that in particular. Best thing I can say as a guess at this particular point is that 30i is not as common anymore right now. 50i typically is, but I also don't really shoot in an environment where I ever need interlaced that often anymore. I know there are a lot of specialty situations where it is an important thing. But that is something that we can ask our engineers and see. Powell, I think I'm pronouncing that right. Is it possible to use the second gain circuit on a GH6 sensor like a GH5S, dual native ISO to maximize low light shadow noise performance at fixed light, if even at the expense of DR? So fundamentally, the GH6 sensor is not the same at all as how a dual gain circuit system works. So like what you see in the GH5S or S1, S1H, S5, cameras like that. So there is no way to actually separate them at all. That's not how the system works. DR Boost is taking a single frame and processing it twice through two separate circuits, or through two separate converters. And then the processor's combining those two images together with the different values that are set for each, the highlight range and the low light range, and then combining them into one image. Where a dual native circuit like what we use in an S1H is two analog converters, and you're basically just picking which one you want to use. Do you want to use the high sensitivity or do you want to use the high saturation? So fundamentally they are different, which means that you can't just flip and use one different circuit because it's just not how it's designed to work. So yeah, it is just totally different. Without DR Boost on, you're still getting 12 to 12.5 stops of dynamic range, which is still pretty high when it comes to especially interchangeable lens cameras. DR Boost, if you really need that extra highlight dynamic range, that's where you can set it. Typically with my camera, it's on DR Boost all the time, unless I know I need to go shoot 4K 120. Anything outside of that, I'm using DR Boost almost 100% of the time, so yeah. Let's see here. Alan says, suggestions for the engineers. When an option is blocked due to other options, it would be great to have an override button to automatically change the settings necessary. That is a very good recommendation. I know that we have asked that in the past. I don't know where it stands on including that. But I will 100% bring that back up to our team when they are all back in office. And yeah, I agree. It would be nice to be able to just click a button and have it turn off that feature or flip it so that you can select the thing that you're on and not have to go through a menu. As it sits now with the GH6, if I'm going to end up wanting to switch to the higher frame rate options and I have DR Boost on, I have one of my front two custom function buttons programmed to just drop right into that DR Boost function. So I can just click it, change it over, and then I'm good to go. So not as fast as what you're suggesting, but still pretty fast by comparison to what I just demoed on the stream. Let's see here. Jeremy, it would be awesome to be able to set DR Boost to automatically activate and deactivate it from over 2000 and not shooting at high frame rate. Why would I not want to use it? So there are circumstances where you may not want to use DR Boost. If you're looking for the cleanest possible output from the camera, DR Boost is going to jack your ISO up to 2000 natively. But there are certain circumstances where you don't want to necessarily be using it at higher ISOs. Those reasons kind of escape me. I honestly don't know. But yeah, there has been conversation about, is it something that can be automatic? Is it something that needs to stay as a manual choice? But something like that, I can definitely bring up to our team. Is it something that they think could be added in as a potential automatic mode like we do on the dual gain circuit cameras, where you can just set auto and then it'll handle it for you? Yeah, we can ask though. Let's see. Marcus says 48p would be interesting. Interesting for what? I don't know if I missed part of your question, Marcus. But the GH6 does do 48 frames per second. Does native 48 frame and high frame rate. So you do have tons of flexibility. In fact, we talk about this a little bit in the stream or the recording, right? The logic that I can just be recording a 4:3 aspect ratio image and do my punch-ins where necessary, and then I'm good. I get a solid piece of content. Thank you, YouTube, for locking up for a second. Recording, right? Logic. Okay, there we go. So we're back. So you have the option to be doing things like open gate, and that's cool. But now you also have the thought process when it comes to frame rates. I could be shooting at 48 frames per second for like 90% of the stuff that I'm doing if I know I'm delivering a 24p project, because I can put it in the software, and software is really good at handling 48 frame, just ditching half the frames, and you're good at 24 frame. It's a very easy output. But then I'm always available to have that 50% slow-mo if I need it, for any given particular style of shooting. So yeah, 48 frame in the camera, it's pretty simple to just shoot pretty much everything in 48 frame and then use your software to shift everything. Motion cadence, I understand. Motion cadence gets into that conversation as well, but there's also some pretty cool tools in software that can actually mimic the motion cadence properly. And get you some pretty reliable outputs. Let's take one more question, and then we'll jump back into the menus here. Sacred City says, what is the native ISO, and where can I read more about it, about the sensor? So I don't have anywhere that you can read about the sensor, but native ISO, it depends on whether or not you're using DR Boost on or off, and it also depends on what color profile you're in. So if you are in Vlog on the GH6, DR Boost's native ISO is 2000. When it's off, it's 250. So that's simple. That's it. When you go to standard profiles, so like 709 or natural or even just standard, so any of those other things outside of Cine like D2 and V2, then your base or native ISOs are 100. So it goes to the lowest number that's on there. That's kind of like the easiest thing that you'll see as to what you've got, where it is. It's usually, in this case, it's where you're going to be able to go, just drop it as far down as you can. Let's see here. Make sure I got all of the other questions here, as YouTube's yelling at me for bit rates. Where were we? USB recording and USB usable at the same time. I honestly don't have any additional information on the USB recording option yet. When we get closer, we'll get you more info. Let's see here. All right, cool. Let's jump back into the GH6 menu. So we had stopped here on the rec quality list. So the other menu things that have kind of changed a little bit with this, and I'm actually using obviously if you guys were at NAB, you saw that we have the raw output coming for the GH6, so this is the camera I was using there. So we're not even going to look at that menu. But you'll see here time code. One of the things that some people have questions about is time code in general on this camera. So to start with, if you're going to be using, say, an external monitor or recorder, That's the word I'm looking for. So if you're looking for an external recorder, and you want to be able to trigger that recorder just with the button on the camera, so the record button, this is where you want to, one, make sure timecode display is turned on. Then you want to make sure that HDMI timecode output is also turned on. It's one of the areas that a lot of people kind of miss when you're going to set the camera up so that it can do external HDMI triggering for a device. So in here, this is where you've got those different options. This is also where you can go into timecode value. You can manually input, set your current time. If I had an external timecode device on here, I could go in and actually set my timecode. So I can inject it through the attached cable that goes in the front. So that's where all your timecode options are. Like we said, the luminance levels before, you've got the 3 different options here. 0 to 1023 is full range, or 0 to 255 if you're in 8-bit. 64 to 940 if you want to use the truncated versions, or 64 to 1023 if you want to make sure that you're protecting all of the highlight information as well. So you have tons of different, kind of options there depending on the style you're shooting. Like I said, for this particular case, as I just realized I was on 64 to 1023 for YouTube, either's going to be cool. Just get you set up there. So one of the biggest changes with the GH6 actually comes into how you get into things like the subject detection, the focus modes, and things like focus limiter. So as you can see here, we've got a little bit of a different way that the menu operates. So AF detection settings, this is a new menu option for the GH6. This just is saying, hey, I want you to use the subject detection modes, yes or no. So in this case, I have it on. But then when you go into detecting subject, this is where we've actually changed stuff up a lot compared to S series and existing GH cameras or G series that have the subject detection. So we have human detection, which is what we've traditionally been using, which will be head, eye, face, body, all of it together. So that means if it loses the face, it will switch to the head. If it loses the head, it'll switch to body, and so on. When it loses nothing, it switches and reverts back to, or when it loses all of the subject and you're just focusing on something that doesn't have a subject in it, then it'll switch to whatever your focus default backup is. But we've also separated out the mode now for just face and eye. So one of the things that we get some questions about is being able to have the camera set up and do things like present to camera. So traditionally, the way I do it at least, is I don't use subject detection for those things. I have an AF box that's like right here on my frame, and then I just will hold something up and do it that way. But if you do want to be using face and eye detection, you can set the camera up where it won't be using the body information and it will only look for the face and eyes. So if it doesn't find a face and eye, then it reverts to whatever your setting is for autofocus. So with this, if I go out to my main shooting menu here, you'll see that if I go in and I select my different focus modes, you have one, the ability to use subject detection across all of them now. Originally, it was subject detection was only paired with the full 225, or in this case on the GH6, it's, I forget how many points it is now. A lot of cameras now. So this allows me to go in and say, hey, I want to use zone focus for my particular use case, but I also want to have my face and eye detection on. So I can click up here. You'll see that by default, it's set right now to human detection. But if I press the display button, I can go in and say, I only want face and eye. So now when I do that, it gives me zone as my primary, face and eye as the subject, so that if I lose the face and eye, the fallback is not using the entire area to try to find the focus point of what you wanted. It's using the area that you are identifying as the user. This is where I need my focus to go should you lose a face or an eye or an animal. So this works great for scenarios like this where if we're talking like this and I got the box here and I want to hold something up to camera, this allows me to know that, okay, as long as the face and eye detection box disappears, it's going to revert to the point that I'm telling it to, not the full area in this frame, which means it may grab back here. It may grab over here. It's more of that customizing the system to work for your environment. And so far, that little change that we've added to it, being able to come in and decouple things like face and body, has made the system, at least for my type of shooting, which is in a studio, a little bit more controlled environment, a very easy to use, straightforward system. So as we continue going down the menus here, focus limiter is the other main one that we've had a lot of questions about. So focus limiter is the one that lets me to go in here, adjust my focus. Obviously you guys can't see because I just have everything a little too dark here. This allows me to come in here, adjust my focus, come in, pick a point. So say I want to pick that. I can then set 0.1, and then if I want to go out to say the other battery, I can then set 0.2. And then now the camera is going to use that as the range to focus in. It's going to try to ignore everything outside of it. So let's see here. Where were we? So yes, focus limiter. You have the option to turn that on and off. The other thing that you'll notice here is right on to my, well, your left, because you're looking at the screen. You'll see under where it says AFS, you get a little bracket icon. That's your indicator to tell you that focus limiter is turned on. So you definitely want to make sure if you are using it that you remember that you're using it, and you have that little indicator on the screen, so that you know that you've got pretty decent kind of information. You know when you've got it turned on. So if all of a sudden the focusing is just not doing anything at all, you'll know that you have the ability to just know where your point is. Let's see here. See, a couple more questions have come in. See, Gail says, I have a GH5, and when I film outside, I get video with pixelated parts. With the same settings, except for ISO and aperture, I have no problems for pixelation inside. What settings could be the problem? So there could be a couple of things. Short of actually knowing what exactly you've got your camera set up to for things like resolution or focusing, that's going to be kind of a... I'm really not sure what could be causing that. Pixelation... my understanding of pixelation may be different than what you're describing. I think it's Gail. If I'm mispronouncing your name, I apologize. But stuff like that, you can definitely email us at lumixlive at us.panasonic with that question, and I can try to dig a little bit further into it and troubleshoot a little bit more that way. Because, yeah, it's not really something I think I'd be able to figure out while we're on the stream here. Let's see here. Let's see here. Steven says, absolutely love the custom menus where you can select your favorite, but is there an option to filter by pixel or full sensor? Save that option. That would be really useful to me. There isn't really a filtering option to just change out between pixel to pixel or full. The closest you would get is if we're in the menu here and I go back up to the recording quality. If I were to come in here and change it to say, well, let's do it the easiest way I know that I can show this in the most dramatic way. So if I go to 420 10-bit 24p in full HD, right? I can click here and I can change pixel to pixel. I can go to full and I can select my different options there. So that's one way that I can go through and select it, because now if I come in here and I go to pixel and then go into this menu and go to look at the different options, you'll see that if I come up to the 5.8K, when I change into that, that's going to change the camera over to the full sensor. So there's not really an easy way to kind of filter it. Let me just see here. Let me just write this in the chat here first. So lumixlive at us. There you go, Gail. You should be able to shoot an email to that, and I can do my best to take a look and see. It's a lot easier where you can, email like screen grabs, stuff like that, so that we can actually take a look at it. So, yes. So where was I? Yeah. The image area video. So that gives you a little bit of that, kind of ability to filter through ish. I know it's not exactly what you're looking for, but filtering by pixel to pixel would be kind of an interesting thing to see if we could get set up there. Because it dynamically changes and a lot of the modes can use both, I would venture to guess that's why we don't have it as a filtering option, because if you filter it on, it's everything. If you filter it off, it's basically everything except the 5.8K options. So, yeah. What is pixel to pixel? So pixel to pixel means that you're literally taking a crop from the sensor that is the pixels of the resolution that you're filming. So if I am setting the camera up into full HD, it's only going to use the 1920 by 1080 pixels in the middle of the frame to create that image. So you're not going to be getting any kind of downsampling from the 5.8K or 5.7K if you're using 16 by 9 or 17 by 9. So in some cases you can get a noisier image because you're not having the added benefit of downsampling. But in other scenarios, you get an added benefit that you're actually getting a much longer reach. Users that have been working with the Panasonic cameras for a while, especially the GH series, would remember this as being the way that people would use the EX teleconverter option. That would allow you to basically drop into pixel to pixel. We just didn't call it that at that time. So when we came out with the more recent cameras, we just fixed the naming because we basically saw how everyone was using EX teleconverter or digital zoom and just put it into the actual naming of what that is actually being used for. So now that's why it's called image area video. When you go to the full frame cameras, you'll see three options. It'll say full, super 35, or pixel to pixel, or pixel slash pixel. And it's just telling you what region of the sensor you want to be using for that particular style of shooting. All right, let's see here. Absolutely love the custom video menu when you can select your favorites. Okay, that was actually the one that we just talked about. All right, cool. So when we continue down here, there's a couple more things I want to get to before we have to call the stream. Where is it? It's joys of having so many different options in these menus. So sound monitoring. This is one of the other things that's new in this camera. So when we go into sound monitoring, depending on how you have your camera set up, if you're using the 4-channel audio, so you actually have 4 channels being fed into the camera, this is where you can actually go in and mix how you want your kind of monitoring to be. Not kind of monitoring, how you want your actual sound monitoring to be. You can have it where it will mix all 4 channels together so that your headphones are actually giving you what all 4 inputs are providing to you, or you have the ability to come in and actually tweak it out. Pick which ones you want, select which ones are best for you. You can set it so that, left ear is going to be channel 1 and channel 2, right ear is channel 3 and channel 4, or having those two mixed and then into a stereo setup. So this just gives you all that flexibility for how you actually want to monitor your audio. This can be incredibly useful if you've got, say, 4 channels coming in for an interview style where you have 4 separate people talking. You can come in and actually say, I want to hear every individual person clearly so I can set their levels individually. The other way to get into this is to press the audio button on the top of the camera. This will let me come in and select some of the major settings for it that you're probably more likely to change on the fly. So things like, do you want to monitor real time? Do you want to monitor only when recording? What channels, what image quality or audio quality, stuff like that. You have all that flexibility just by pressing that audio info button that's right on the top of the camera. So the last kind of major thing that I'm going to talk about today, before I have to call the stream for this week, is actually under the main cog menu here. And that is the frame marker option. So we've talked a lot about doing things like open gate recording, or utilizing what we currently call in the cameras anamorphic, or anamor, depending on how you read through the menu. Using that mode to be able to give you the most flexibility in post for editing. So if you have a client or you're filming and you know that you're going to want to be able to have to deliver that footage on multiple different platforms, so things like Instagram stories, Facebook, YouTube, all these different areas, you have the ability where you can shoot in the full 4:3 aspect ratio of the sensor, which is going to get you higher resolution than 4K. So you're going to be recording 5.8K. It's actually 50. Here's where I should know these numbers off the top of my head. Where you're going to be recording 5760 by 4320. So what this really kind of helps and comes into play here is when you go in and you select frame marker, I can come in, I can go to set, and I can know, all right, my client is going to want a 16:9 because they're going to want to put it up on YouTube, or it's going to be on a display like a television for advertising material. But I'm also being asked, or later potentially being asked, to deliver a 9:16 because they want to take a cut of that and run it as an advertisement on, say, Instagram stories or Reels or things like that. I can come in here quickly and just say, all right, I want to overlay my 9:16 frame guide. And let's mask this out, and let's set my frame guide to something that's maybe a little, not a common color to tell you that you're recording. So now I've got a 9:16 frame mask set up. So now you can see here, I know where my 9:16 crop's going to be. So I know that I can leave the headroom that I need for vertical shooting because it's different than horizontal. I can frame it properly, but I know that I've got more than enough resolution to do my 16:9. So if I come in and say I change this to 16:9, we'll do a standard, kind of way it looks. We know that I've still got more than enough resolution there. And the bigger part here is that all of the resolutions that you get out of each of these different crops is going to be much, much higher than if you just shot it in 16:9 or 17:9 in 4K. You now have 5.8K worth of height and width, which is just going to get you more longevity out of that product. At NAB, we had a lot of people talking to us specifically about this kind of concept, that you're starting to see more clients ask for these kinds of projects. And what better way to be able to shoot it once and have extra deliverables that you can then turn and say, look, the original scope of the project was only 16:9. You want a vertical crop now? I've got it, but it's an additional fee. It's something from a business model. You've now got the extra protection of future-proofing your equipment. We used to talk about this in the case of 4K when you're only delivering 1080, or now with the whole conversation about 8K, if you're only delivering in 1080 and 4K, you've got longevity for footage. This does pretty much the same thing. The other nice advantage is that you also now have more resolution for doing things like 4K and post-stabilization while still keeping the resolution right. So that's frame guides. Zebra patterns. We've had zebra patterns in the cameras for a while now. With this camera, you do have the ability to set two separate and independent zebras. So I can come in and go all the way up to 105 or all the way down to, I think it's 50. Or I can set a base range and say, I want this to say, let's go base range. And then let's change this to, say, 42, which would be, if you're metering for skin tones or mid-gray, 42. And then I only want to have, say, a latitude of 5% for that. So now what this means is when I come in here and I set my zebra patterns to, say, 01, and I probably don't have enough light here for this right now. I do. You can see that on the gray for the battery there, that's telling me that the part that's actually being lit by the zebras or shown by the zebras is my middle gray point. That's saying that it's within 5% plus or minus of 42 IRE. I can make it even more defined, where I can come in, go to base range. I can say that I want this to be within one up and down. So it's either going to be 43, 42, or 41. So now when I come here, you'll see that it gets even more accurate. So as I start to change the colors or the exposure here, you'll see I blow right past it there. but then come in here, and I know that that little triangle on the battery is perfectly at 42 IRE. So now I can go through, look at my overall image and see, are my highlights way blown, or my shadows way crushed, and then light my scenario if I'm doing it that way. This is one of the kind of bigger built-in tools that the camera has. You also have the ability that when you're not using the zebras in that particular way, so say if I set these to 50 and I set zebra 2 to say 80, then I can also come in and say I want to use both zebras. And this will let me come in and say, all right, I've got my 50 IRE is what's in the middle. You'll see the one direction for the crosshatch, and then my highlights are the other direction of the crosshatch. So that gives me a relatively good mix as to where my 80% is, and then in this other case where my 50% is. So it makes it pretty simple, pretty easy to quickly run through and take a look at what your exposure is. I apologize for the dogs barking. Someone just knocked on the neighbor's door. So what was the last thing here that I wanted to cover? Really comes down to, where is it here? It's going to be to card formatting. So everyone knows that the GH6 supports CF Express Media, and CF Express Media is that newer platform that we're using. If you've worked with them, you'll know that we have CF Express cards here. Again, I apologize for the dogs barking. When you first get a CF Express card and you put it in this camera, make sure that you go to card slot 1 for format, and then you'll notice that we have an added thing in here now called low level format. When you work with a new card and you put it in the GH6, and this is true for pretty much any camera, any card that you're going to put into that camera for working with, make sure that you actually set and format the card in camera. You need to write the file system properly so that it knows how to actually work with what you're set up on here. Now, when it comes to CF Express cards, I do low level format anytime I'm working with it to make sure that it is properly set as to how it's supposed to be. So that's one of the last things to make sure of there. And then the fully last thing here is one that I have yet to see anybody talk about. The GH6 has the ability to change your file structures 2 separate ways. You can use the DCF standard, which is what we've been using in mirrorless interchangeable lens cameras for a very long time. So this is where, if you go to DCF, this means that you're going to see DCIM and then a folder that in this case says 103_PANA, and that's how your file structure is going to be. So when you take your image and you've got it set up, it's pretty chill. We've worked with this forever. It's fine. But recently over on Reddit, I had seen a user that was having some challenges with tentacle sync and clip naming. Because if you've got multiple cameras and you don't go set up the prefix for the files that your camera puts out versus, say, a second camera, you may run into situations where the cameras are recording the exact same file name in your workflow, which causes a problem, especially if you're trying to do things like syncing footage later with timecode or syncing audio later, or if you just want to be able to know which is camera A and which is camera B. So the GH6 now also builds in the Cine style file naming, which allows, it changes where the files are stored. So this stores them under the private folder, the PANA group folder, but this allows me to come into Cine style, change the file's name, and actually give my cameras their index number, index identifiers. So camera A, camera B, camera C, and then every time you take the card out or change the card, it'll write to a new, it'll identify that that's card 2, card 1, whatever. This massively makes the production use case for the GH6 so much better to work with. When you've got multiple cameras in set and you want to know that, you know, camera A's footage is right here, camera B's footage is right here, and it's all organized that much more efficiently and more in standard with what a cinema camera is going to record when you're actually into the offload side of your capture of your time. So with that, that's actually all I have time to talk about today. This is a topic that I am going to revisit again. We are going to continue going through the menus. There is just so much in this camera that is available. So I want to make sure that I get everything covered for everybody over time. We have the rest of the schedule up already for Lumix Live for the rest of May. So if you haven't already, go take a look at the Lumix Live playlist. You can check the link down in the description below, and set your reminders for the rest of the streams. We do these every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern time, so it's the same time, same location. But yeah, make sure to go take a look at those. Share them with people that you think may be interested in this kind of content. I love creating this stuff, and I love having the conversations with all of you. It's kind of the highlight of my job. What else am I missing? One last reminder about Lumix Pro Services. If you haven't already, make sure to go take a look at Lumix Pro Services here in the US. We do also have Lumix Pro Service available globally. Links are all down in the description to get information about what's available in your region. If you haven't already, head over to our Instagram channel, give us a follow over there. We do also continue the conversations there in the chat as well as in our DMs. So feel free to hop over there, reach out to us. You can also reach out through lumixlive at us.panasonic.com. That email address will be displayed at the end of this stream. And yeah, outside of that, next week, I think we've got next week's stream is on Lumix Tether. Now that we've actually kind of got out of NAB and we've got a whole bunch of questions that came in through that, we're going to be talking about Lumix Tether, both from a photography and a stills perspective, and also continuing the Q&A conversation. So pretty much what we did today. What else? The next major shows that we're going to be at physically, now that we're getting back into actually being at shows. We will be at Cinegear, at least everything's planning to be at Cinegear, and we're also going to be at Infocom too. So if you're interested in coming to meet us or talk to us in person, our team will be a little bit split up because our shows go on at the same time. But yeah, we will be at Cinegear LA as well as Infocom in Las Vegas. Those are next month in June. So make sure to keep up to date. If you haven't already and you liked this content and everything that we talked about today, I'd appreciate if you give us a like. It helps me build this channel. It helps me, kind of show the value and see if you guys are actually liking what we're talking about. And if you don't already, maybe this stream warrants a subscribe to our channel. These streams are so much fun, and the feedback that y'all give us throughout these are what help us build better future products. So outside of that, thank you everybody for spending the time with me today. We'll be back next Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern time on Lumix cameras here on YouTube. And yeah, look forward to bringing you more content in the next video. Thanks for watching.